Brett, you want to kick us off here? Let us know what we're talking about today.
Well, today this is the fifth of a 4-week series about agave. So we've covered tequila, we've covered mezcal in some depth, and we've gotten a lot of questions from the crowd. So we have decided to start extending it a few more weeks. One of the topics that was brought up was what other spirits are produced that are very artisanal, that are produced in Mexico, not only artisanal, but historic. And so one of the ones we had a lot of questions about was charanda and different forms of aguardiente, rum, whatever you want to call it. So we were able to call on our friend Francisco Terrazas, who we'll introduce you to. Francisco works for, probably best known for Mezcal Vago, but is now working for Tequila Ocho as well, and is also one of the best ambassadors for agave and artisanal ancestral Mexican produced spirits that we know. So he's a perfect person to have. Francisco, before we start, we want to ask you one question, because you need to settle a fight between Michael and Lou.
Okay.
Do you think that if mezcal tastes smoky, it's bad?
Is smoky mezcal bad mezcal would be the question.
Well, that's kind of a silly question. I mean, if somebody likes smoke, they're gonna think it's good. If somebody doesn't, they're gonna think it's bad. So it's not silly. It's just difficult to pin down.
Okay.
And that's not even me being political. That's just me looking at it kind of, just having so much time talking to people about these spirits. It's like asking it's like asking if peaty scotch is bad, right? If somebody likes that peat, then Lafroig's going to be great. If they don't, then it's not going to be good. I think it's more about what, how is it produced, and why is that smoky profile? How is that smoky profile there? Is it smoky because they don't know really how to distill that well, and they're not paying attention to their stills, or things are getting roasted for a longer period of time, or is that just the way they like to produce their spirit? So that's my rather long-winded answer to that question. It's difficult because it's all based on what somebody perceives as their preferred flavor profile. Right?
It sounds like actually.
No, I think you actually elucidated exactly what the need is. It because you defined whether it is happening because people are lazy and careless, or is it happening because that's a flavor profile people want?
I mean, I've had mezcals that were left underground for 2 weeks or longer, and you're going to get more carbonization. You're going to have more smoke on that. And if you're fermenting open, which you probably are, and you're firing your stills for a longer period of time, you're going to capture more of that bottom end profile that's going to lend that spirit, that flavor profile, and that's just stylistically, that's the way some producers are putting out some mezcal. Some that I've really enjoyed, some I've enjoyed less.
Francisco, is a question on that too. I feel like some of the smoky, savory flavors that people talk about in mezcal are also often a function of the colas, of going deeper into the colas.
Exactly. Yep.
And I think that people sort of leave that out, that sometimes it's not even just cooking, it's really how you make your cuts, how do you decide your final flavor profile. And I feel like,
so you're deeper into the tails for the non-informed.
If you
so
go
you're talking
deeper into
tails,
colas, you can get almost like a savory, like barbacoa kind of flavor.
Or hot dog. They can be like hot dogs.
Depends how you feel like your hot dog's well done. Yeah.
Which I do like burnt hot dogs. But
I'm not fighting with you about hot dogs too. I don't care.
But yeah, I mean, I was doing a presentation earlier today when I talked about still cut, distillation times and cut points, and like looking at Mezcal Vago. That's why Joel is a little earthier and a little richer and more kind of bottom ended, I would say, is the way that I kind of describe those. And rather than being high toned and like really bright, you think of like kind of darker, earthier bottom end flavors. I think of that as being more longer distillation. That's why Joel's mezcal, even though they're very close to each other geographically, though the Mezcal Vagos with the yellow label, Joel Barriga, they tend to have a little bit more oily texture, more richness, kind of fattier and more savory. And some people perceive them as being a little smokier versus Aquilino, who historically had taken, rest in peace, had taken a much earlier cut on his still and produced some of the brightest mezcal that's in the category.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's actually also, thank you for being here. We should have clipped that and gone back in time to about 3 weeks ago, because that was extremely and succinctly explained better than we did a good job stumbling over it.
Better than
Amen.
these guys did fighting about it.
Well, it's probably the third time I've done it today, so I hope that I can elucidate it as you know, the more I do it.
Yeah.
I mean, the fight's not settled. That's still ongoing, but we appreciate it.
And even if it were settled, we'd find something else to fight about, Miguel.
Now we'll make an audience poll for which weapon they have to choose next.
Right, exactly.
All right.
So
well,
let's talk about
on that, Francisco.
Let's talk about aguardiente de Mexico.
Great.
Did I say that right, Michael?
No. but I totally love the way you say it, and you should change nothing. So we should definitely kick this to Francisco, who has spent a lot of time up in the Cañada region and helped develop the Para Nubes brand, like helped develop the flavor profile with Jose Luis Carrera. Francisco, take it away.
I mean, I'm happy to. You know, I hear you guys mentioning that specific term charanda a lot this evening. That's where I would like to start, is differentiating between the two. You know, I mean, charanda is a very small geographic area around a village called Uruapan in Michoacan. And that's pretty much the extent of geographically of the denomination of origin for charanda, which is a relatively new denomination of origin, having been established in this century, in fact, I believe. So it's geographically a very small area in what is a very, very large country with a lot of coast, a lot of tropical and subtropical climate, where you're going to get a lot of cane growing. So when you think of how much area in comparison there is under cane planting versus how small charanda is, it's pretty minuscule. But that being said, there's one distillery in particular one distillery that does a couple of brands that have seen a lot of success. So not a ton of success. In context, a ton of success in the marketplace, right? As far as the global marketplace and notoriety compared to agave spirits, kind of small, but it's growing very quickly, right? And that is the distillery in Uruapan, for which one of the brands is named. So that is a very specific type of cane distillate versus what you see around most other areas that I've been to. In Oaxaca, in Mexico rather, both in Oaxaca, central Oaxaca, northern Oaxaca, parts of Jalisco. I've heard of and talked to people who have been working on establishing some projects in Sonora, although that's probably going to be unrealistic, and we could talk about that in a second if we want to. Chiapas as well, all producing other cane spirits, typically called aguardiente de caña. So Para Nubes, that's what we labeled ours as, aguardiente de caña, which is the regional, or I guess the local name for it, but that local name applies in most other areas where they have some type of cane distillate. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense. Everywhere else I've been, it's aguardiente. I've been to Michoacan, but unfortunately I have not been to the area around Uruapan, so I've not had a chance to visit there and speak with them. But, you know, charanda is something very specific, and in hearing some of their presentations, they have a very deserved sense of pride about what it is that they're doing and setting charanda apart from aguardiente de caña, to give themselves a little bit more regional identity and really set it apart from everything else that there is in the market. But with so much area under cane, I mean, there's so much different flavor profiles, alcohol proofs, you know, there's a huge diversity of styles of spirit that we're getting from sugarcane throughout Mexico. So it's something that I think it's just kind of starting to sprinkle into the market, but I think there is a downpour coming, if you will forgive my kind of sloppy metaphor there. But we're just starting to see the very beginning of it, and it's something that I think is really exciting, and I think could give you maybe not quite as much diversity in the category as you would see in agave spirits, but I definitely think that it would be probably the second richest category for the different flavor profiles that you're able to pull out, especially if we're talking about something simply in the raw material, right? Without any oak influence or anything like that, just based on regionality, fermentation, and the type of cane you're using, being able to produce such an expressive spirit. It's really, really incredible. I mean, we can even just look at the Clarens that are just starting to come in from Haiti for an example of that, right? There's 4 or 5, even within just the one portfolio that I happen to have some very good friends representing, and that's the Spirit of Haiti portfolio. There's maybe 5 different producers coming from Haiti that are putting out what they call Claren. It's a cane juice distillate. And that within those 5 different distilleries, there's a vast array of difference in those different producers' spirit, right? And compare Haiti geographically to Mexico, and that just kind of gives you just a slight glimpse of how much diversity I think there can really be in this category.
Francisco, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Would you mind just maybe taking a step back, because a lot of our viewers might not even be really familiar with aguardiente, and maybe just talk a little bit about molasses-based rum versus like jugo de caña.
Right.
To give some context.
So cane has we would have to go back to essentially the 16th century, which is roughly when cane first landed in Mexico. A lot of people don't realize that in a lot of regions, they either don't have a history of distilling agave, or if they did, the distillation of cane actually predates the distillation of agave in a lot of places. Or if it doesn't predate it, it has historically been more prevalent. The Sierra Norte, where Tosba Mezcal is from, is a great example. I was lucky enough to have my friend Alessandro on our show a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about historically when he was growing up, there really wasn't any agave distillation going on. Everybody was distilling cane. And this is in Oaxaca, north of Oaxaca City, so not even along the coast, and kind of a pretty insulated area from the coast. And even there, they were distilling cane. So cane as a crop and as a distillate has a very rich history in Mexico that people don't realize. There's a couple of,
Francisco, and it would have come, just real quick, and it would have come primarily just like rum was basically produced in the islands. It would have come to Mexico originally for sugar production, right? And then distillation would have happened as a byproduct of the sugar products.
Right. So cane as a crop in and of itself has a really rich history in Mexico. I touched on this on my show also a couple of weeks ago, where at one point there was more slaves of African origin in Mexico than there were Spaniards at one point, because they were bringing in so much labor, particularly for the cultivation and harvesting of their cane industry. So it was really prolific, predominantly, as you can imagine, along the Gulf Coast state, particularly within the state of Veracruz. So because that was such a important port in Veracruz, that's where you saw all of most of the goods coming out of Mexico to either go to the Caribbean, Hispaniola, or to continue their journey east into Spain. All of it was being shipped out of Veracruz. And one of the biggest cash crops in that area, because the climate was suitable for it, was cane. So cane, particularly in that part of Mexico, and then gradually over time, it migrated further west and is now kind of extending that kind of lower southern longitude belt in the more tropical areas, which includes Oaxaca, down to Chiapas, and obviously Veracruz, as we mentioned, of course, the Yucatan, Quintana Roo. There's a lot of cane growing in those areas. At one point, Mexico was the 5th largest cane producer at one time, usually for processed sugar. I think it's still in the top 10. So it's always been a pretty prolific cane producer as a raw material. And we're just talking about sugar, not cane distillate. But it's been a pretty prolific cane producer and that's something that people don't realize. So you can see, given the historical prevalence of cane as a crop in Mexico, you can see how it would naturally precipitate that they would eventually begin distilling that, because it was this raw sugar. It was this raw sugar source. So obviously that lent itself to cane distillation. In the United States, historically, all we've really seen, though, is your more traditional molasses-based distillate, what we traditionally think of as rum, right? So what Para Nubes is, what we're using is pure cane juice, very similar to rum agricole or Claren from Haiti. That's what Para Nubes is. But on the U.S. marketplace, you've only seen a few of them. I think we were the first aguardiente de caña to come into the market in the U.S. The charanda from Uruapan predates Para Nubes, I think, in their U.S. debut. But overall, it's been a very, very small drop in the U.S. rum market. Everything else that we've really seen from the U.S. has been that typical molasses-based rum, which is just a distillation of a byproduct from the production, from the sugar refinement process.
And I love Para Nubes, and I love the fact, I think I love the flavor so much because it's open air fermented. But is there anybody who's doing closed fermentation on just the straight up cane juice that you know of?
I haven't seen anybody doing so. Are you talking about closed fermentation or inoculated yeast fermentation? Because those are two different things that are going to give you very different flavor profiles, right? Because you can have open air fermentation, but still be inoculated. I mean, look at tequila, right? Like,
sure.
I don't know tequila producers who actually cover their fermentation tanks, but they're producing a very consistent profile because they're using a cultivated yeast strain, and they're using that yeast strain every single time. Oftentimes it's a champagne yeast. A lot of really great tequilas are still produced using champagne yeast. Sometimes it's a proprietary yeast that they did capture from the fabrica, the distillery, and then just cultivate that and use that for their fermentation. So we have to be very deliberate in the verbiage we're using for the fermentation process. As far as closed top fermentation, I haven't really seen anybody doing that. I believe the guys at Casa Tarasco, the people who make I believe make charanda Uruapan, I think that's the name of their overall fabrica. They're using open air, but I believe they're cultivating yeast. The guys at, I think it's called Puerto Angel, is another aguardiente brand that they're using open air fermentation as well. And the Gustoso guys, if one of you guys know, I know that somebody represents Gustoso in the Chicago market. So
Craig Hildress.
Yeah.
They might be, if anybody's talked to them, I think
they're definitely open air. Yeah.
Yeah. So not that I know of, but one of the things, I think the flavor profile of Para Nubes is partially dictated by the fact that we're open air fermentation. And Michael, sorry if we jumped. I feel like we started to address your question, then I jumped ahead, but we can go back. I'm more than happy to. But Para Nubes is dictated by a few different things, several different variables. In the fermentation process, one of them is the fact that we're using ambient yeast fermentation, but also we have a 4-month rolling fermentation. And we're the only people in the area, let alone within the kind of pantheon of aguardientes from Mexico. We're the only people that I know of that are fermenting for that long a period of time. And that's really where we get more of the savory components, more of the richness. And you can see it in the fermentation, what we call it tepache. You can see it when it's a fresh batch. It's very thin. It's more watery. It's got a higher water content. As time goes on, a lot of the oils, a lot of the lipids from the cane juice actually accumulate. So it actually does become a little oily, a little greasy to the touch, especially by the end of that 4-month fermentation process.
And you're probably autolyzing too a little bit in there. You have to be, like you talked, the longer fermentation goes, the more chance that you can autolyze. In other words, the yeast will actually start eating some of the alcohol and some of the lighter alcohol that's not as heavy. So you'll get a little bit of that'll go on too. And you wouldn't want it in cane, or not in cane, sorry. Like for instance, Scotch producers try to stop that in malt because it's such a delicate sugar source. But it's interesting. We'd have to talk to a Claren producer to see if any other traditions of distilling fresh cane have a fermentation that's that long, so it has that as a component too.
Francisco, is that what you mean by rolling fermentation? Like you start and then it's not done until 4 months, or are you adding to it and pulling out of it?
that's what I wanted to clarify. I call it rolling rather than rolling because it can, to me, that denotes kind of refreshing it periodically, which is what we do. We actually crush cane every single day. So it's kind of hard to visualize a little bit, but I'm going to do my best to explain it for you guys. We have 2 production lines. Production lines is a very fancy term for what it really is. We have 2 stills. Each one of those stills has 2 fermentation vats that feed it, okay? So every day, Jose Luis will distill half of one fermentation vat in the very early morning, and then in the mid-morning, he will fill that back up with the fresh cane juice from what they cut that morning. And then the next day, he will distill half of that other tank and then fill it back up. And he will alternate between those 2 on a daily basis. So every day it's getting half of the cane juice distilled while the bottom half just sits there and remains there for up to 4 months. But every other day, it's getting replenished with fresh cane juice.
Is there a terminal point where they stop? Is there ever a terminal point where he just empties the fermenter and starts a batch again, or no?
Every 4 months.
Every 4 months. So every 4 months is when he will pitch everything, clean it out with a little bit of basic, kind of like some mud. He'll scrub it out just a little bit. They'll rinse it out, and then they will soak it for about, I believe, about 4 days, so that it rehydrates the wood, so you don't get any leaks. And then he will pitch a new batch of juice.
So interesting. So when he distills, or are we getting to that? When he distills, does he keep all the distillate as it's rolling along? Because I would imagine that there has to be a little bit of a difference between a lot of difference between a fresher and what goes when you're finally emptying out. Or does he only still empty half, distill half, and then just get rid of the other half of the fermenter? Or does he fully distill the fermenter out when he empties it?
When he's emptying that out, he will distill whatever is left and pull off whatever alcohol he can.
He can, sure, okay.
But that being said, we separate our distillate out into 5 sections every day, and then we separate it by day as well. So when we go up there after about 2 months, we have something like, for each still, we have something like 90 18-liter jugs that we're pulling from, that we're tasting, and then blending it in to get a consistent profile as much as we can, given the somewhat uncontrollable nature of our fermentation process.
Right. Okay, perfect. Lou?
No, I was just catching a bug. That was it. That was actually the exact question I had. It seems like it would taste different from batch to batch, but then, yeah, okay,
right.
blending.
And it does. It definitely does. Yeah. And that's why that was one of the small changes. I mean, you can see, some people might think it's a small change, some might not. We think it's a relatively negligible change to how he was distilling, is that he would actually basically break his runs down into large sections of all the days. He would break it down into 3 sections, right? So every day he would dump the first third of his distillation into a big container. He would dump the second third of his distillation into a big container, and the third section into another big container. So whenever he had a batch of, let's say, maybe 500 or 1,000 liters, it would be separated into 3 containers for, first cut, heart, and tail cut, essentially. We asked him to break that down into smaller sections and separate it by day so that we had a little bit more control of the flavor profile, because there was a very vast evolution of flavor profile from day 1 of a fresh batch. And then, day 120, 30 days, by 4 months.
What's a day's distillation?
So 500 liters will render about 90 liters of distillate. So that's why I say we had 5 18-liter glass garrafones by day.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now pulling this back a little bit for maybe some listeners here who haven't really been introduced to the Para Nubes brand. We talk about this as aguardiente de caña. It's kind of notable for a lot of reasons. Elevation is probably one of the biggest influences, right?
Yeah, elevation influences on which part though? On
I guess, I mean, the size, this distillation, how did this become, how did you find this thing eventually?
so
I mean, like
went,
somebody just happened to be going way out of their way up a dangerous mountain road in Oaxaca and
They were
came
looking
across a
for
rum distillery
mushrooms.
one day?
It was just mushrooms.
well, yeah, I mean, to Pat, to what you're saying, yes. And we could talk about the mushrooms in a second if you want to, Lou, for sure. But the mushrooms don't really have a lot to do with how we found Pata Nubis. They're a big part of the culture, which is, and it's a very mystic culture, which is one of the beautiful things about it. But to answer your question, Pat, yeah, basically, but in not necessarily where you would think it happened. Judah, my boss, who founded Mezcal Bago, was actually driving back from his father-in-law's house or ranch in Candelaria, Yegolé, which is about 3.5 hours, about 3 hours south of Oaxaca City. And he saw this Rasta bum guy, just like a guy on the side of the road, dreadlocks in his hair. But, and he had a gas can and in his gas can, rather than having aguardiente in his arm, was actually, or rather than having mezcal, which is what you typically see, it was actually filled with aguardiente. And, this is weird because it just happened to be from this town called Huautla, which is a very famous town historically because of this really well-known priestess who kind of started this cultural movement around these psilocybin mushrooms. So that's how the town became famous, but that's also where they grow a lot of cane and they produce some aguardiente. So Judah picked this guy up about, however, I can't remember how many kilometers wide Oaxaca is, but basically, 500 miles from where it was being produced. And he told Judah where this town was. So Judah already knew Huautla very well, or knew of it. So he went on an adventure and just kind of, he would take a couple days every 2 or 3 weeks, go traveling around. And it's very similar to Mezcal culture in this way, in which you're traveling through these canyons, these tiny little mountain roads, and you really do see, you're driving down and you hear the putt-putt of the little 2-stroke engine that they're using to drive the roller mill. So you're just driving down and you hear this little engine, this little gas-powered engine, and you just know that they're crushing cane there. Oh, the guy across the street, you can hear it running. The guy, next door, you can hear it running. So everybody has this mill, and usually they're using it for their raw sugar production, just for their own house, or maybe to sell at the market. They're producing very raw, unrefined sugar, panela, or piloncillo, a lot of people know it as. So they have mills, and then sometimes they'll set some aside and use the juice to ferment and distill. So you're going through these villages, and you're just, basically just asking people who has aguardiente, who sells aguardiente, etc. And we just tried several different producers from that area, and we just got lucky at one point and tried some. We passed by Jose Luis's town and tried some of his aguardiente, and you could see the diamond that was there, but just needed a little bit of polish to it, if you will. And that's really how we found it. So he just picked this guy up on the side of the road in the southern part of Oaxaca. He got it from the northern part of Oaxaca up by Veracruz and Puebla. So we searched, and we just luckily happened to run across Jose Luis, and it's just been incredible working with him ever since then.
Wow.
So I like that connection back to Mezcal too. So there are dozens and dozens of people that are doing this.
Yeah,
Just
totally.
like there are dozens and dozens of people that are making agave spirit of a form, basically based on their region and their area.
Yeah, now realistically in that area, cane is the cash crop of the area. Most of it goes to just raw sugar production or gets sold to be processed at the mill in Veracruz. Because there really isn't a sugar mill in that area. You have to ship it just over the mountains to get to Veracruz. But other than that, some people are growing on a small scale, papaya, maybe some other fruits to sell at the market. There was a coffee crop from that area that is now in the process of slowly being rescued. But leaf rust is a very big issue in that area, and that might present some challenges to the coffee, to the kind of coffee growers that are trying to resuscitate that industry. We've looked into it and talked to some third wave coffee friends who have advised us on it. It'll be a challenge that I would like to see that happen. This as another economic output for the communities, but right now it's really cane for the most part.
Well, I guess what I was getting to with my other question that was kind of out there and nebulous was really what's our baseline of comparison for something like a Paranubes versus more conventional rums that we see? I mean, we're familiar with some cane sugar rums from Haiti, Clarins, rum agricole.
Cachaza.
Yeah, totally. Cachaza. What's the biggest, what would you consider kind of the key points of differentiation that we should be narrowing in on when we're talking about these spirits within the realm of those other rums of the world?
I would say the common thread that runs through this category of cane juice distillates, and it sounds like a very easy play, but it makes sense. I mean, they're all grasses, right? Cane is a grass. So it makes sense that there would inherently be this vegetal, grassy quality to these spirits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most people are not familiar with fresh cane juice. They don't understand that it has an earthiness to it. It has a funkiness to it. And across those other distillates from other countries, you can, and I just realized how dark it got in here. Please forgive me for just a moment. There we go. So you can see from these other distillates in these other countries, that richness, that earthiness, that funkiness from the cane juice is going to vary based on, are they adding water to the fermentation? What kind of cane are they using? What proof are they distilling it to, etc. So you're going to see different levels of body and richness and things like that, the fruitiness, how are they fermenting? But overall, you're still going to maintain this grassiness that once you get it in the palate, you're going to know that it's a cane juice distillate. What I think really sets Paranubes apart from that is that incredibly long fermentation process. From a flavor perspective, I would almost say that it's this kind of weird hybridization of your more kind of classically, what you classically think of when you get a cane juice distillate, but then blend it with a little bit of the flavor profile of a really dunder heavy Jamaican rum, for example, like something with like a Smith and Cross or something like that, where you have these really petrol-y and really banana-y notes and things like that. And you blend those two together so you get that grassiness on the nose and you get it on the palate, but then also on the nose, you get this heavy waft of just rich, tropical, funky fruit. And on the palate, on the finish, you get this really bright hit of salinity, which I'm not 100% sure, honestly, where that comes from in Paranubes. I would imagine it's coming from the fermentation and also that last hint of maritime air that blows in from the Gulf of Mexico, because we're literally just across the border from Veracruz. So that air will blow in from the coast, blow across the coastal plain, go up into the mountains, and then that dense air will kind of settle in these river canyons. So I think we get a little hint of that maritime climate as well.
Interesting. The form of fermentation is crazy. I've never heard of anything else being fermented that long, outside of maybe 6 weeks for some of those really funky Jamaican rums.
Yeah, and open, but you have like all that. I mean, it's scientifically, it's amazing. It would be great to run a lab on the whole process of that going through to see how much autolyzing has happened, which will give you some of that funk as well. Is basically the yeast starts to eat the alcohol instead of sugar.
What else is growing in there?
Like what else is getting in? Well, in that, and it's open, because I would assume that a lot of cleaner rum agricoles, which are, I suppose, an expression of just pure cane juice, but a very clean expression of pure cane juice, because in a lot of those cases, the bigger ones are, I would have to reach out to somebody to find out how much is closed fermentation, but I would have bet their fermentation's a lot more clean versus what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And you're fermenting in stainless steel. I'm not
100%.
I think you're distilling in stainless oftentimes as well.
Yeah.
I would think at the volumes that they're producing at they're probably distilling in stainless as well. versus, we have a 500-liter copper pot, which is larger than our mezcal distills, but that's still a pretty small.
Well, they would be doing a lot in alembic rather than stainless. They're probably doing a lot of stuff in alembic stills because the mechanically the distillation would have been something they would have learned first from Armagnac producers and Southern French distillers probably. But that's interesting. So how much effect, because the other side, is there any tradition that's not sort of carpet bagging and commercial for distilling molasses? So for instance, like Bacardi distilled a lot. There was a chunk of Bacardi rums that for a long time that were produced and aged in Mexico. And that would have been much more traditional molasses based. Is there any sort of tradition like that has evolved from Mexican tradition rather than brought in from the outside?
Oh man, some guys in Mexico are probably gonna want to kick me when I say this for knowing, but I not that I can think of, definitely not in the U.S. market. And the reason I say guys in Mexico is because I've seen a few more marks in rum in Mexico and feel like I should be able to key in on some, but I can't think of any what you might think of as like a craft molasses rum producer in Mexico. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah. Is there somebody that's done it just because that's kind of something they decided to do of their own volition? Or is it something that is more like almost like contract? This is a place that has a lot of cane where we can make product that will go back and get blended into something that's, in the a la Bacardi.
There might be, but I'm just so far removed from that world that, the only other really somewhat established, even in a larger scale, established molasses-based rum that is truly what a Mexican rum is Mayacambo, and that's at the same facility that they're producing Kahlua out of. So that should give you some idea of the scale that they're working on, right?
Though I think it should be noted that in fact in the gnome for charanda, it even says that you can distill from molasses or PNCO or
so the guys from Uruapan, they have two really well-known marks out, right? Well, I don't know how well known, but well known,
relatively.
Our world, very well known. One comes in a blue bottle, one comes in a white bottle. The clear bottle with kind of the more antique looking label is a pure cane juice distillate. That one right there. So that one is more that Michael's holding up. That one is more similar to what you would see in. It is more similar to what we're producing. It's cane juice distillate. I believe it's distilled 100% in copper. Right. That's what I thought. Yeah. The one that comes in the blue bottle, which is a really cool package in and of itself, that's actually a blend. That is a blend of molasses and cane juice, 50-50. They distill the molasses-based fermentation in a stainless steel still. They distill the cane juice-based fermentation in a copper pot still.
Hey, Francisco, there's another super cool piece to the fermentation of Jose Luis, which I think that you should talk about too. The tepahuaje.
Right. Yes. Thank you. I meant to mention that earlier. I'm glad you reminded me. So that is one thing to note. When we are high enough, we're low enough in elevation, wherein we're somewhat insulated. Right. It's a little bit warmer, obviously, down in our really narrow river canyon. That heavier, warmer air tends to kind of sink down and sit where Jose Luis is located, versus some producers who are higher up in elevation. So
what is Jose Luis's elevation again?
He is at 4,200 feet.
Right. Just to put it in perspective, like that's the valley, right?
Yep.
Coming down.
Right.
And the canyons, right? These canyons are incredibly narrow. You could almost throw a rock across them in some instances. So the topography is very dramatic, huge, drastic elevation changes. So, Huautla is like at 6,500 feet or something like that. And you're descending down essentially from Huautla. It's a little bit further than that, but you're essentially just going straight down this river canyon. So there are producers at higher elevations who actually have to use chemical fermentation aids, when they're starting their fermentations. Jose Luis, because of that little bit of a warmer air that sits in that canyon, he's actually able to get away with using a natural fermentation aid rather than a chemical accelerant. And that is actually a tree bark that he uses. In mezcal production, I've met some producers who use the same technique. They call it tepehuaje. Jose Luis actually calls it mesquite, but it's not what you would think of from the Sonoran Desert mesquite tree. It's a different tree. But he takes the bark from this tree and will boil that to make a tea. And that's what he actually pitches into the fermentation tank when he starts a new batch. But that one batch of tea will last him the entire fermentation run, because once the fermentation gets healthy enough, right, the yeast, there's a high enough yeast population that they can start to sustain themselves, then he doesn't need that anymore. So it just helps kick off the fermentation process, basically.
It's sort of a Red Bull for yeast, is what you're saying.
Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. Essentially.
Yeah.
You know, can we talk a bit about Jose Luis? Because I like, it's fascinating to me. You guys find him in essence the middle of nowhere, right? Yeah. And he was making this for local purposes, and now he's being shipped worldwide. This has to have changed his life significantly for the better. Well, it's significantly.
Yeah. One thing I want to note for just a moment, though, before we shift to Jose Luis, while I'm talking about the tepehuaje, just because we were talking about distillation and cuts and stuff like that, we actually won't, when we start a brand new batch of fermentation, we actually won't capture the first 2 or 3 days of distillation because of that tepehuaje wood. And I'm just curious, can anybody guess why we wouldn't do that? How do you spirit geeks out there, particularly Brett, Pat, Michael, you guys? Well, not Michael, I think I already told you. But it's furfural.
Ah,
right.
Furfural comes from wood alcohol, right? So we've run tests, and the furfural content is too high for us to actually bottle. So he'll actually keep the first 2 or 3 days, redistill that a few times after he's finished with that fermentation batch, and then sell that. But what we use for Para Nubes, actually, we can't capture the first couple days. The distillate is actually a little bit cloudy as well when it comes off the still. And it's got a very piquant, very sharp flavor as well. So we actually let it mellow out for the first 3 or 4 days when it's a brand new batch before we actually start to capture what we're using for Para Nubes.
Yeah, furfural is interesting. Well, furfural is also, because that is like, if you take a breakdown of all the fractional alcohols that come off the still at different temperatures, furfural also comes at the very, 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 very end. Like, we've got a kit that Moonshine University has a really good kit, just that it breaks down all the fractional pieces. Yeah. And the heaviest, highest temperature alcohol that they give you in the kit to smell and recognize is furfural. And you're right, and it's pleasant. It's actually, you know, in the right amounts, it's actually pleasant. It
like
can
radiator
kind of be like
cooled.
A little bit. No, it's like cherry or stone fruit. It can kind of
like
smell a little bit like, for
coolant.
some people, like amaretto.
But Lou, to get back to your question, yeah, I mean, I would love to talk about Jose Luis a little bit. Do I have the ability to? I do, right? I have the ability to share a screen, don't I?
You should. Yeah. Let's see here.
Great. Just because for Para Nubes, it's very visual. So
there you go.
So just to give you guys an indication, this purple circle here is the region called the Sierra Mazateca. You guys can see that on that map, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where we're producing it. So you can see it's just off of it's just above, it's just outside of that the coastal plains around Veracruz. And you can see we're just starting to get into the mountains in here. So I think that's one of the reasons we still have a little bit of that maritime influence that gives it that salinity to it. And I was talking about the elevation changes before. This kind of gives you an example. You can see across the huge river canyon. I can't throw across that river canyon, but down, you can see down in there that the river just runs through there. But this is probably about halfway down from the ridges where Jose Luis is. And that's the village that he's producing in Rio Tuerto. This wisp here actually is not clouds. That's actually the two-stroke for the cane mill that he uses. And we are actually we're at the very early stages, but right on his property, about maybe 50 yards from where the still is, he actually has a huge river with a little waterfall running through it. We really want to look at how to actually harness that to actually power the mill, because I have seen that done in some cane juice distillate producers. Excuse me, Michael, I misquoted myself. 3,600 feet, not 4,600 feet, is where Jose Luis is. So this is Jose Luis right here. He's been producing aguardiente for 35 years. He is really a third generation. Sometimes they use the term just kind of like mezcalero, aguardientero. So he learned from his father and his grandfather. This village you see here is actually called Rio Tuerto de Carrera. So his grandfather actually started this village, and this is all his extended family that lives here in this canyon. So it is a very small community. And yeah, I mean, it really has had a very positive impact on the community around them. I mean, the floor for the local aguardiente that people are selling has risen, because while we actually only work with Jose Luis for Para Nubes, the people around him will charge their price and tell people, well, if you don't want to pay this, I'll just sell it to the American guys who are, who have this brand, because they'll buy it. So it's lifted the floor for the local producers, which is great.
That's awesome.
It's also the price of cane. We've kind of just done it to ourselves, really. The price of cane in that canyon has really tripled the last time I checked, which was about 6 months ago, maybe 9 months ago, since we actually started Para Nubes. So that's one of the other positive impacts that you've seen, as well, is the fact that it has actually raised the overall price for cane in the area. Jose Luis was really close to giving up on the town of Rio Tuerto when we met him. And he tells this story often. He was in a kind of a dark place. He was just very despondent about the future of his town. At that point, most of the rest of his family, his daughters, his wife, were living in Oaxaca, just running a little sandwich shop and bodega on the corner. And he was just trying to hold things together in this community, because he really is kind of one of the linchpins for the community. Obviously, in these remote, self-sustaining communities, all the municipal work gets done by the community itself, right? So Jose Luis has always been one of the people who kind of organizes those projects, kind of maintains just maintains the town, really, and is really one of the figureheads in this village. And he's just very ingrained in this community, but he really didn't see a future there. The cane wasn't producing any money. The coffee crop had been dying. He was really just about to pack up and move to Oaxaca. And more than likely, the town of Rio Tuerto probably wouldn't have lasted more than 20 years after he left, I would imagine. But he was about 2 weeks away from giving up, and he was really despondent and really sad given his family history there. And now his family has moved back from Oaxaca. His daughter has moved back and helps him run the operation for us. Her name's Gabby. She's phenomenal. She's really, really rad. Monique loves her to death. When we were lucky enough to go there with Monique. And Michael, you've met Gabby. She's incredible. She's great. She's really the liaison between us and her father, and helps us kind of all be on the same page. She's really vital to the operation. His wife has moved back there as well, and now just his one daughter who already has like her own family in Oaxaca City. So it just didn't make sense for her to move back. But he's a lot more hopeful now about the future of the town, which is really, really great. So yeah, awesome. I mean, it's definitely had a very immediate and positive impact that I don't think you always necessarily see in the mezcal world, because I don't know if it's just because there's not necessarily more layers, but just its complete own existence in Huautla. Miahuatlan, for example, is still very connected to Oaxaca City as an economy. This place is much more isolated, and I think it causes a much quicker immediate impact on the local community than I think you sometimes see in agave spirits production. This is just some kind of geeky details. Half of it is coming from the immediate area. We can get into some of this later.
There was a question asked that I think is important to address before we run out of time here.
Yeah, totally.
Which Daniel asked, like, how do you drink it? Do you drink it straight or in cocktails?
Yeah.
And then how does the flavor profile compare to something like Clarin or rum agricole and agave spirits for that.
So I think we kind of touched on how the flavor profile compares earlier when we were talking about that common thread, Daniel. If you'll remember, we were talking about the common thread of the fact that they're all grasses, right? All cane variety. Cane is a grass. So you're going to have this grassy vegetal quality that is very inherent in pretty much, you can't really get away from that if you're distilling cane juice spirit, right? So that is really the common thread. Because of that really long, rich fermentation that Para Nubes has, the ambient yeast in the fermentation process, we have a really rich, heavy body to Para Nubes. And I think a lot of that has to do with that long fermentation because, as I mentioned, it's very ligero, very thin, kind of watery when that fermentation batch starts. But as time goes on, you actually get accumulation of a lot of the oils from the cane in the fermentation process. So that adds a lot of body, a lot of richness. We're distilling on copper. If I didn't mention that earlier, so here's the mill and the fermentation tanks. So you can see here, he distills half of one day, fills it up, and then distills the other. But the distillation process is done on this copper pot with these 6 plates. So that gives it a little bit of
crazy.
As well. It's kind of a hybrid still. It's buried into the earth. That's one of the cool things. The whole operation is actually built on a hillside. We don't pump anything. It's all gravity fed. We just open up the plug and let it pour into the still. But as far as how to drink it, I really love it in cocktails. That's kind of what that was the whole genesis of Para Nubes. Mezcal, and particularly our model, we don't really have something that's always the most economical option for a bar operator. We wanted to do something that was a little bit more friendly to pour costs for our bartender friends who have, like Michael, who have really sustained Vago as a brand historically, and that was completely different and something completely fun. So we really envisioned it as something to create some really incredible cocktails. That being said, the easy play is to go with kind of citrusy flavors, right? The things that you would usually associate with your agave spirits. But one of the things that I really have enjoyed about it is seeing some of the savory presentations that people have made, particularly on the stirred cocktail end. A Presidente, for example, which is a cocktail with some rum, traditionally white rum, dry vermouth, triple sec, and a little bit of maraschino liqueur. I really love it with Para Nubes. It's savory. It almost blends together a rum stirred drink with a martini because of that salinity to it. It's a beautiful aperitif drink. And also with stirred drinks that are done with maybe a fortified wine, like a sherry, for example, with the salinity from the sherry and the nuttiness coming in and layering with the savory characteristics of Para Nubes, it makes for some really incredible drier style stirred cocktails as well. Michael, would you care to add anything to the cocktails as far as what you guys have been doing at Asterio?
I mean, I'll never forget the first time I tried it. You were in doing a staff training about Vago Mezcal, and then at the end of it, you're like, oh, I got this like little something for you guys to try. And you poured us a taste of the Para Nubes, and I lost my mind. At that point, we had one aguardiente de caña from Ecuador, the Shumir, which is it's cool. It's like super, super industrial. It is what it is. If you're a teenager like in Ecuador, this is what you drink, Shumir. But I really wanted to feature aguardientes. And like we already have Lost Lake, which is, has an amazing rum collection of molasses-based things. One of my notions for Asterio was to showcase unaged spirits that never touch wood, that speak of the time and place and raw materials where they come from. Pisco in Peru, in Mezcal, in Oaxaca, Michoacan, etc. Sotol in Chihuahua, tequila, cachaça in Brazil. So I really wanted to do aguardiente de cañas, but we had nothing. And then we had this. So from the minute Para Nubes was available, at Asterio, our cocktails are we don't have names for them. They are they're done by spirits. So it's mezcal or it's pisco, etc. So our quote unquote rum cocktail, from the minute that Para Nubes became available in the United States, has become the aguardiente de caña cocktail. And we have always featured it. And it works across the board in all kinds of preparations. We do one of my favorites is we do in the heart of the summertime. It's blueberries from
There it is. Klug Farms.
Francisco's favorite farm in St. Joe, Michigan, my hometown. Just fresh blueberries, like lightly muddled, Blanco vermouth from Spain, homemade pineapple bitters, lime, sugar, para nubes. It's absolutely amazing. We just got done doing a piña colada, which we did actually a trio of aguardientes led by para nubes, but also some charanda, and also the awesome brand Cañada from Jason Cox, which is also an aguardiente de caña from Oaxaca. So the classic piña colada, frozen, but only aguardiente de caña, not molasses based. Just fresh pineapple, fresh lime, sugar, a little sea salt. It's just unbelievable. The big difference between, not to pick on molasses rums, because I love some Dunder rums and some Demerara rums from Guyana, and I love my Havana Club from Cuba, but molasses rums are more or less a fairly industrial product that don't really speak of a time and place, unless you're talking about a practice like heavy Dunder and heavy congeners from Jamaica. When you're looking at a rum that comes from the juice of sugarcane, you get a real sense of this is an agricultural product that comes from the earth, that is related deeply and endemically to very specific cultures and time and places. And sort of the mission of Esterio has always been to showcase the singularity of those spirits and their terroir or de la tierra with that time and place that we also get from local fruit that we get from Michigan. Mm-hmm. So para nubes is a perfect example for that. And it's always on the menu in at least one drink, often two.
And can I just add, because I really do love drinking para nubes neat. I really love drinking it neat. It reminds me of so many things of childhood. And, I grew up out in the farm country. And, to your point, Cisco, like it reminds me of running through the grass as a kid. I just love it.
And, and again, I absolutely love it as neat on its own, but not as like this dry rum, as this rich, savory, kind of chewy spirit that, again, like similar to Mezcal, we're at 54%, we're a little higher, that you just drink slowly and sip on. And it, I don't know, it's got so many flavor profiles, and I really embrace the savory aspect of it. Not just the fruitiness, the cane aspect of it, just for me, the salinity, the just that richness to it is something I have not encountered in other spirits before, and that we really wanted to showcase on the rum, but also anchor it with the cane profile so that it works well in your more tropical cocktails, right? Your jungle birds as well, your fun, fruity drinks, the ones that Michael is cranking out at Esterio, and just give people something that wasn't a blank canvas, that had a really predominant identity to it, was unapologetic, but still managed to play well in so many different scenarios, is what we were looking for. And we've just been really stoked on working with Jose Luis on it. Really excited to start getting some aged expressions out into the market. We have some French oak coming out by the end of this year.
Nice.
Next year, we should have some American oak, all single filled ex tequila barrels that we were lucky enough to get from our friend David Suro at Siembra Azul.
Nice.
So only used once and used for tequila rather than American whiskey or bourbon, which we're really stoked on to see how those play off of each other.
That's really cool, man. I like it. Just back to the cocktail thing briefly. I'm pretty lazy when it comes to cocktails, and I don't have the patience of a ruble to like mix up lots of ingredients. I tried it though in the kind of classic drink of Martinique, a tea punch, which is how you'd normally drink a Blanc rum agricole, just with some lime juice and a little bit of sugarcane syrup, and I thought it was great. And it made it a little friendlier because it can be a challenging spirit for the uninitiated,
Like I said, unapologetic, man,
Yeah, totally.
But and that's one of the things where, like, when you go now, we've kind of set it up that Jose Luis, and the only way to, gives you incentive to go to Wildlands or to go to Rio Tuerto is we actually welcome people with kind of a mini daiquiri of fresh lime, a little bit of panela sugar, and a little bit of the fermenting cane juice, which still has some sweetness and some funkiness to it. and just kind of doing like little mini daiquiris of that. But yeah, I mean, and honestly, it's cliche, but aside from being maybe like a Presidente or something stirred like that, a daiquiri, you know, just really easy with a turbinado sugar syrup, a rich simple syrup, and just some fresh lime juice. I think this with the richness and the funkiness, it really just gives you something that is refreshing as a daiquiri should be, but also is just so expressive and rich. Like the aromatics on Pata Nubis are incredible. A bartender opens a bottle at the bar to make a daiquiri and you smell it 5 or 6 seats away in 10 seconds. You know, the aromatics on this product are incredible, and that's going to give itself, and that is going to show up in something that is clean and neat as a daiquiri, which you don't often see. Yeah.
It's a pretty cool spirit. I mean, there's a lot more to Mexico than just agave spirits, as I hope we've kind of begun to adequately cover today. As we've said before, these Monday talks could go on forever, I suppose.
We didn't even, like, I thought we were going to cover a little bit of Posh at least in this, because like when Cisco started out, he was saying all the cane, so of course they're going to ferment it. Well, where the hell are the corn distillates out of Mexico? There's a lot of corn in Mexico. Where's that?
How about next Monday?
Okay,
How about next Monday? We still have to talk about corn.
We're supposed to talk about Mazate again next Monday as well.
Oh yes. Oh no, is next Monday's Mazante. Maybe in 2 weeks we talk about.
Yeah, Pedro. We don't mess with Pedro.
Yeah, that's right. We need to get that sorted out. So next week Mazante then. And get back to some of the Mezcal Raicilla and other.
Yeah. And then maybe we get Ivan Saldana to talk to us in 2 weeks about corn in Mexico.
Francisco, when do you want to come back?
What's that?
Said, when do you want to come back?
Oh, I would actually love to come back and listen to Pedro talk. Actually, if you want to talk about mushrooms, you can talk to Pedro. He's actually been to Huautla. He spent a lot of time in Huautla, actually.
Really?
We have
on our trip.
He knows
we have a distiller.
Anyone I've ever met.
We have a distiller friend in California who owns a brandy distillery, who also is a past president of the California Mycological Association, who is actually growing a strain of spores that I believe at some point in time came from that general area that is now. Well, we won't go too far.
I know you guys are winding down, so I'm not going to take up too much time. But the show on Vice, where the guy goes around and tries different drugs from different places, he actually goes and visits Huautla on the episode and does like a mushroom cleansing in that village when he's on the episode about mushrooms, which is pretty interesting. But they actually grow the mushrooms. It's too cold in Huautla, so the town that's famous for mushrooms, they actually grow them down in the canyon, like around where Jose Luis lives, and will actually, because it's warmer there and more humid, so they'll actually grow them, and then take them up to Huautla to actually sell them there.
Monday drug talk too. No big deal.
Well, just to be clear, alcohol is a drug, so every Monday we've been talking about.
It's 2020, man. I don't care. Everybody needs a little something these days. Well, Francisco, thanks a lot, man. This was so informative. This was awesome.
It's a blast.
Yeah.
I miss Chicago, as you guys probably know. So anytime I can connect with anybody who's there, I embrace it. So thank you guys for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. And next week we'll have. By the way, we did miss Monique this week. She says hello. Like I said, I think that
Monique.
She's in doing something. We don't know 100% for sure in Northern Idaho. Take that as you will, but
shooting cows.
She'll be back.
Definitely not experimenting with mushrooms, though. I mean,
yes, she'll be back with us on Monday when we talk to Pedro next Monday at 5 o'clock.
Everybody who joined us tonight, thanks a lot. Brett and I will be back on Wednesday with Horse Soldier Bourbon, Horse Soldier Whiskey, and we'll see you back again next Monday for some Mazante.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Cheers.
Take care, guys.
Night.
Francisco, thank you again.
See ya.
Everybody else, we'll see you later.
Great to meet you, Francisco.